Hello. Hope you guys are having a great, what are we, September 11th, and no towers are crashing down around you. Maybe it's not a good time to make that joke, but look, yeah, it's an interesting day, and I think with what's happened in Afghanistan recently and the amount of power that's been granted to something like the Taliban, then attacks and things like those are far more likely now. So I do genuinely hope that everyone's safe on this day, but enjoying sunshine like I am. What a cracker day. Going to do a quick reading from here about a really interesting discussion, and something that I'm personally going through in my head at the moment. And I'm looking at sort of what's happening with how we're being told to run our businesses, who we can talk to, who we can serve in our businesses, who we're not allowed to serve, like the segregation that governments are imposing on what we're doing. So I'm just going to go through this and then see how that sort of relates to sort of what I feel like I'm going through at the moment. And I know a lot of other business people are experiencing similar things. So let's get into it. All right. For an instant, Reardon looked as if he wanted to slap his own face. Then he laughed softly and said, "All right, sit down." He waited to see what advantage Francisco would take of it now, but Francisco obeyed him in silence, with a smile that had an oddly boyish quality, a look of triumph and gratitude together. "I don't damn Ken Danager, I don't know how to pronounce that," said Reardon. "You don't?" The two words seemed to fall with a singular emphasis. They were pronounced very quietly, almost cautiously, with no remnant of a smile on Francisco's face. "No. I don't try to prescribe how much a man should have to bear. If he broke, it's not for me to judge him. If he broke, well, didn't he?" Francisco leaned back. His smile returned, but it was not a happy smile. "What will his disappearance do to you?" "I will just have to work a little harder." Francisco looked at a big steel bridge traced in black strokes across red steam beyond the window and said, pointing, "Every one of those girders has a limit to the load it can carry. What's yours?" Reardon laughed. "Is that what you're afraid of? Is that why you came here? Were you afraid I'd break? Did you want to save me as Dagny Taggart wanted to save Ken Danager?" She tried to reach him in time, but couldn't. "She did? I didn't know it. Miss Taggart and I disagree about many things." "Don't worry, I'm not going to vanish. Let them all give up and stop working. I won't. I don't know my limit and don't care. All I have to know is that I can't be stopped." "Any man can be stopped, Mr. Reardon." "How?" "It's only a matter of knowing man's motive power." "What is it?" "You ought to know, Mr. Reardon. You're one of the last moral men left in the world." Reardon chuckled in bitter amusement. "I've been called just about everything but that. And you're wrong. You have no idea how wrong." "Are you sure?" "I ought to know. Moral? What on earth made you say it?" Francisco pointed to the mills beyond the window. "This." For a long moment, Reardon looked at him without moving, then asked only, "What do you mean?" "If you want to see an abstract principle, such as moral action, in material form, there it is. Look at it, Mr. Reardon. Every girder of it, every pipe, wire, and valve was put there by a choice in answer to the question, right or wrong. You had to choose right, and you had to choose the best within your knowledge, the best for your purpose, which was to make steel, and then move on and extend the knowledge and do better and still better with your purpose as your standard of value. You had to act on your own judgment. You had to have the capacity to judge, the courage to stand on the verdict of your mind, and the purest, the most ruthless consecration to the rule of doing right, of doing the best, the utmost best possible to you. Nothing could have made you act against your judgment, and you would have rejected as wrong, as evil, any man who attempted to tell you that the best way to heat a furnace was to fill it with ice. Millions of men, an entire nation, were not able to deter you from producing Reardon metal. because you had the knowledge of its superlative value and the power which such knowledge gives. But what I wonder about, Mr. Reardon, is why you live by one code of principles when you deal with nature and by another when you deal with men. Reardon's eyes were fixed on him so intently that the question came slowly, as if the effort to pronounce it were a distraction. What do you mean? Why don't you hold to the purpose of your life as clearly and rigidly as you hold to the purpose of your mills? What do you mean? You've judged every brick within this place by its value, to the goal of making steel. Have you been as strict about the goal which you work and your steel, have you been as strict about the goal which your work and your steel are serving? What do you wish to achieve by giving your life to the making of steel? By what standard of value do you judge your days? For instance, why did you spend 10 years of exacting effort to produce Reardon metal? Reardon looked away, the slight slumping movement of his shoulders like a sigh of release and disappointment. If you have to ask that, then you wouldn't understand. If I told you that I understand it, but you don't, would you throw me out of here? I should have thrown you out of here anyway, so go ahead, tell me what you mean. Are you proud of the rail of the John Galt line? Yes. Why? Because it's the best rail ever made. Why did you make it? In order to make money. There were many easier ways to make money. Why did you choose the hardest? You said it in your speech at Taggart's wedding, in order to exchange my best effort for the best effort of others. If that was your purpose, have you achieved it? A beat of time vanished in a heavy drop of silence. No, said Reardon. Have you made any money? No. When you strain your energy to its utmost in order to produce the best, do you expect to be rewarded for it or punished? Reardon did not answer. By every standard of decency, of honour, of justice known to you, are you convinced that you should have been rewarded for it? Yes, said Reardon, his voice low. Then if you were punished instead, what sort of code have you accepted? Reardon did not answer. It is generally assumed, said Francisco, that living in a human society makes one's life much easier and safer than if one were left alone to struggle against nature on a desert island. Now, wherever there is a man who needs or uses metal in any way, Reardon metal has made his life easier for him. Has it made yours easier for you? No, said Reardon, his voice low. Has it left your life as it was before you produced the metal? No, said Reardon, the word breaking off as if he had cut short the thought that followed. Francisco's voice lashed at him suddenly as a command. Say it! It has made it harder, said Reardon tonelessly. When you felt proud of the rail of the John Galt line, said Francisco, the measured rhythm of his voice giving a ruthless clarity to his words, what sort of men did you think of? Did you want to see that line used by your equals, by giants of productive energy, such as Ellis Wyatt, whom it would help to reach higher and still higher achievements of their own? Yes, said Reardon eagerly. Did you want to see it used by men who could not equal the power of your mind, but who would equal your moral integrity? Men such as Eddie Willers, who could never invent your metal, but who would do their best, work as hard as you did, live by their own effort, and, riding on your rail, give a moment's silent thanks to the man who gave them more than they could give him. Yes, said Reardon gently. Did you want to see it used by whining rotters who never rouse themselves to any effort, who do not possess the ability of a filing clerk, but demand the income of a company president, who drift from failure to failure and expect you to pay their bills, who hold their wishing as an equivalent of your work and their need as a higher claim to reward than your effort, who demanded that you serve them, who demand that it be the aim of your life to serve them, who demand that your strength be the voiceless, rightless, unpaid, unrewarded slave of their impotence, who proclaim that you are born to serfdom by reason of your genius, while they are born to rule by the grace of their incompetence. That yours is only to give, but theirs only to take. That yours is to produce, but theirs to consume. That you are not to be paid, neither in matter nor in spirit, neither by wealth, nor by recognition, nor by respect, nor by gratitude, so that they would ride on your rail and sneer at you and curse you, since they owe you nothing, not even the effort of taking off their hats, which you paid for. Would this be what you wanted? Would you feel proud of it? I'd blast that rail first, said Reardon, his lips wide. Then why don't you do it, Mr. Reardon? Of the three kinds of men I described, which men are being destroyed and which are using your line today? They heard the distant metal heartbeats of the mills through the long thread of silence. What I described last, said Francisco, is any man who proclaims his right to a single penny of another man's effort. Reardon did not answer. He was looking at the reflection of a neon sign on dark windows in the distance. You take pride in setting no limit to your endurance, Mr. Reardon, because you think that you are doing right. What if you aren't? What if you're placing your virtue in the service of evil and letting it become a tool for the destruction of everything you love, respect, and admire? Why don't you uphold your own code of values among men as you do among iron smelters? You who won't allow 1% of impurity into an alloy of metal, what have you allowed into your moral code? Reardon sat very still. The words in his mind were like the beat of steps down the trail he had been seeking. The words were the sanction of the victim. You who would not submit to the hardships of nature but set out to conquer it and placed it in the service of your joy and your comfort, to what have you submitted at the hands of men? You who know from your work that one bears punishment only for being wrong, what have you been willing to bear and for what reason? All your life you have heard yourself denounced, not for your faults, but for your greatest virtues. You have been hated, not for your mistakes, but for your achievements. You have been scorned for all those qualities of character, which are your highest pride. You have been called selfish for the courage of acting on your own judgment and bearing sole responsibility for your own life. You have been called arrogant for your independent mind. You have been called cruel for your unyielding integrity. You have been called antisocial for the vision that made you venture upon undiscovered roads. You have been called ruthless for the strength and self-discipline of your drive to your purpose. You have been called greedy for the magnificence of your power to create wealth. You who've expended an inconceivable flow of energy have been called a parasite. You who've created abundance where there had been nothing but a wasteland and helpless, starving men before you, have been called a robber. You who've kept them alive, kept them all alive, man among them, have been sneered at as a vulgar materialist. Have you stopped to ask them, by what right? By what code? By what standard? No, you have borne it all and kept silent. You bowed to their code and you never upheld your own. You knew what exacting morality was needed to produce a single metal nail, but you let them brand you as immoral. You knew that man needs the strictest code of values to deal with nature, but you thought that you needed no such code to deal with men. You left the deadliest weapon in the hands of your enemies, a weapon you never suspected or understood. Their moral code is their weapon. Ask yourself how deeply and in how many terrible ways you have accepted it. Ask yourself what it is that a code of moral values does to a man's life and why he can't exist without it. And what happens to him if he accepts the wrong standard by which The evil is the good. Shall I tell you why you're drawn to me, even though you think you ought to damn me? It's because I'm the first man who has given you what the whole world owes you, and what you should have demanded of all men before you dealt with them, a moral sanction. Reardon whirled to him, then remained still, with a stillness like a gasp. Francisco leaned forward as if he were reaching the landing of a dangerous flight, and his eyes were steady, but their glance seemed to tremble with intensity. You're guilty of a great sin, Mr. Reardon, much guiltier than they tell you, but not in the way they preach. The worst guilt is to accept an undeserved guilt. And that is what you have been doing all your life. You have been paying blackmail, not for your vices, but for your virtues. You have been willing to carry the load of an unearned punishment and to let it grow the heavier, the greater the virtues you practiced. But your virtues were those which keep men alive. Your own moral code, the one you lived by, but never stated, acknowledged, or defended, was the code that preserves man's existence. If you were punished for it, what was the nature of those who punished you? Yours was the code of life. What then is theirs? What standard of values lies at its root? What is its ultimate purpose? Do you think that what you're facing is merely a conspiracy to seize your wealth? You, who know the source of wealth, should know it's much more and much worse than that. Do you ask me to name man's motive power? Man's motive power is his moral code. Ask yourself where their code is leading you and what it offers you as your final goal. A viler evil than to murder a man is to sell him suicide as an act of virtue. My God, this is good writing. A viler evil than to throw a man into a sacrificial furnace is to demand that he leap in of his own will and that he builds the furnace. By their own statement, it is they who need you and have nothing to offer you in return. By their own statement, you must support them because they cannot survive without you. Consider the obscenity of offering their impotence and their need of you as a justification for your torture. Are you willing to accept it? Do you care to purchase at the price of your great endurance, at the price of your agony, the satisfaction of the needs of your own destroyers? No. Mr. Reardon, said Francisco, his voice solemnly calm. If you saw Atlas, the giant who holds the world on his shoulders, if you saw that he stood, blood running down his chest, his knees buckling, his arms trembling, but still trying to hold the world aloft with the last of his strength, and the greater his effort, the heavier the world bore down on his shoulders, what would you tell him to do? I don't know. What could he do? What would you tell him? To shrug. The clatter of metal came in a flow of irregular sounds without discernible rhythm, not like the action mechanism, but as if some conscious impulse were behind every sudden tearing rise that went up and crashed, scattering into the faint moan of gears. The glass of the windows tinkled once in a while. Francisco's eyes were watching Reardon as if he were examining the course of bullets on a battered target. The course was hard to trace. The gaunt figure on the edge of the desk was erect. The cold blue eyes showed nothing but the intensity of a glance fixed upon a great distance. Only the inflexible mouth betrayed a line drawn by pain. Go on, said Reardon with effort. Continue. You haven't finished, have you? I've barely begun. Francisco's voice was hard. It moves into a different section there. I'm not going to read into that. But that is, in my opinion, what a lot of small business people right now are feeling. But they don't necessarily know how to put it to words. And this is why this book's connecting so strongly with me. because it's putting into words in ways that you can understand what's actually happening now, and the feelings that are going on. Because one of the worst things is when you're going through these processes, it's like a grieving process, honestly, what's been done. When you start a business and you're running it, it's like, okay, I haven't technically had a child yet, but it being born, right? But from the people who have businesses and kids, they say that having a business is like having a kid, because you create it, you nurture it, gives you nothing at the start, it demands everything. And the more you give to it and the more persistent you are with it, the stronger it grows, the bigger it gets, and then it starts to give back. But you always have to nurture it, you always have to grow it. One of the things with businesses is that like you genuinely love them because it's an expression of who you are. Or that's how I feel about mine, anyways. I feel like it's an expression of who you are and what you stand for and what you believe. And when people trade their money for the service that you're offering or the product that you're creating, it's putting a value to who you are and that expression and that personification of it, I guess, or bringing that to life. And it's an incredibly powerful experience. It is for me. And to have that taken or shut down is like, it's not as bad at the moment, but the pain that I sort of feel, and what this sort of exemplifies, it's this slow decaying death. And it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter how much you know or how good the business is or how good the service is or the product. You've got these people that, for whatever reason, are running the world at the moment, and they're the looters, the thieves that couldn't produce anything if their life depended on it, so they need to be leeches and feed off those that can actually produce and create. You've got these people making decisions, and when they make these decisions that you have to shut down or you have to stop, it's like this slow decay of your business and this steady death. It's not like they're just going, cool, business gone, done. It's not like a quick kill, like a bullet to the head. So it's not like a murder in that sense. I would describe it as like the disease Alzheimer's, because watching my mother go through this was a horrible experience, although I believe that I've majoritively dealt with it now. But it's been her body's still there. She's mentally gone. She's just a shell. But that started when I was about 13, 12, a little bit younger. So I only really had a mum for 10, 11 years before this illness sort of took hold. And then by the time I was 18, we'd have a conversation, half an hour, she'd forgotten it. Maybe not even that long. But watching that decline and not knowing it was happening was torture as a child. It was, and we deny it. We'd make excuses for it. A lot like people that make excuses for the government and what they're doing. It's for our safety. It's for this. It's for that. Because you don't want to accept the reality of it. You don't want to accept what's actually happening. Man, I'd never thought about this before, but what's happening is it's a very similar process, but it's for business. And the process of Alzheimer's is so cruel. It is so cruel. And the way that it kills the brain, the last part of the brain that it kills off is the ability to breathe and the heartbeat function. That's the last bit. So everything else, the movement goes, the ability to swallow goes, the ability to see, the ability to stand, the muscles, all these things over a period of, what's it been now? Jesus, nearly 20 years. It's 17 years for my mum, who got it early. A lot more people are getting it now. But I think she was around 46. They think it sort of started for her, which at the time was like unheard of. And it's this horrible, horrible, torturous way of killing a human being, and watching everything that they are and everything that they were just slowly being destroyed in this method that is so cruel. It's you've got to respect it, in all honesty, because it is. I respect the disease. I think it's a perfect disease in the way that it destroys and dehumanizes and causes immense amount of pain, not just for the person that's going through it. God knows what she was going through, um, but for the people around it, it is so lethal and so brutal. I would have much preferred have my mum die in a car crash, or have her get cancer and have it be done in 1 or 2 years, or like I just don't care. Like I way would have preferred any form, because it's quick, it's done. It's like with business that's happening now. What they're doing is they're making it a very slow and painful process, and it's been about 18 months or 20 months, nearly 2 years for most people, and you're getting this process where they're just, they're chopping off a foot, and then they're chopping off an arm, and then they're taking fingers, or they're taking I don't know, like stabbing you with a knife and then patching it up and saying, "Oh, look, it's all okay." Um, and the way that they're doing that is so cruel, and it's so mean, and it's so painful to go through. It sucks on so many levels. But I didn't. I mean, what do? You don't want to abandon your child. You don't want to abandon, like, your mother going through what she was going through. Um, and so you want to keep working. The same as is in here. Like, they want to keep working. They love their business. They love what they're doing, and they think it's really, really important. So they don't want to abandon it. They don't want to leave because they don't want to be seen as giving up. And that's massive for me. Like, I never quit. I never give up. And adapting and shifting to an online version, like even doing this stuff, is huge. To it's sort of a way that I can be like, oh, okay, cool. I can actually keep the business going, and I'm not giving up. It's more for me and my code to be like, I can accept this. But the idea of the mandates of the medicine, we'll call it, that they're trying to shoot in everyone and make everyone take, completely illegal, and they know it, so that they can operate or they can participate in business or in society or in life, is astonishing. And it came from, like, it's been this progression over this time period. It came from um, the start of this whole thing, the lockdowns, the shutdowns, and this fear that they're using to drive it. And like, it's this slow, demoralizing decay of business, and it is incredibly painful. And I know that more people are going through this. But one of the things that I love about this book, and I love about that, apart from it just being able to be like, versus, it was written in the 50s, right? So this was written so long ago about completely different circumstances, but the feelings and the experiences and the patterns are the same. They're just wearing different costumes now. That's all it is. And to be able to read that, and it's this idea, like, when you're suffering or you're going through pain, you're like, oh, cool, I'm not the only one. That's a massive relief when you can get that, and to know that that's happened throughout history is a relief in some way. But looking at how it's solved, because governments rely on people, man. They rely on businesses, and if you just decide to stop operating, um, it hurts them a lot more than it hurts you. And if you're looking at why you're making these decisions, like, why don't I want to give up? And I say, because that's not who I am. But I'm not the only person involved in that situation. So who else is involved, and what standards are they playing by? The government's playing by a standard where they don't give a shit what you're doing, what you're saying, what your actions are. They're apparently God now, and they're going to determine exactly how you're going to live your life and what you're going to do. And if you want to live in that system, then you have to conform. But the system doesn't survive without the people creating the businesses and feeding the leeches that are taking everything from the people that are producing. And so if you just choose, okay, cool, I'm out, fuck it, I've had enough. This is, it's it's not okay. I'm just going to choose not to live like this. I've just started in this last section of this book, which is, oh my God, it's like a dream. I swear to God. They've created like their own society, and they're in these fields, and everyone's sort of doing their own thing, and they're producing. They've got their own form of money. They've got their own exchanges. You've got people doing what excites them, what they're passionate about, and they're all producers. Like, they're all these amazing business people. And some of them may not have the natural abilities of others, but they all work in their areas of genius. Like, it's phenomenal. I'm reading this, I'm like, oh my gosh, can this just be my life? Like, and I haven't made a decision whether I'm going to pull the plug or not yet, but I'm certainly at a point where, the online stuff I'm not going to, because I think this is really important, and it might just be a shift in direction. But certainly in ways of dealing with the government and things like tax. Like, why the hell would you want to pay tax to someone who turns your house into a prison? You haven't committed a crime, but they make you feel like you have. And the rules that they're just coming up with, like the other part in this book, they control people. I think I read it in the last excerpt that I did of this, not through a moral code or right or wrong. They just create all these laws, not so that people keep the laws, but so people break them, because then it allows them to control and manipulate them and work in a society of favors, not a society of production or actual commerce. And it's exactly what they're doing with these new rules. Like, every day, every week, you've got these new rules that you supposedly have to follow, and everyone's like, "What the shit? How am I meant to do this? It doesn't work. And it's not real. It's all fake." But it's done in a way to psychologically destroy and manipulate people, so that it doesn't matter what you do, you will be wrong. Like, it does not matter what you do. But it's designed intentionally, and it's a crazy, crazy thing that they've done. But there's a lot of people, and I think most people don't agree with what's going on. And you just find them and be like, okay, cool. Let's go do our own thing. Let's go create something over here in a way that these people cannot trace, cannot track. And these guys revert to gold as the currency. And they just use gold and silver to sort of trade around. They've got their own people doing minting, and own people creating energy and then food. And it's phenomenal. For me, it sounds amazing, because you've got these brilliant minds who are like, sweet, like, I create something, you're going to pay for it. Good. And then if I want something that you've created, I'm going to pay for it. And it's this idea of there's no entitlement in that field. And if you're not a producer, if you're not adding to society there, you're gone. You don't get to mooch. You don't get to steal other people's work simply for the fact that you exist. Like, it's not the way it works. And I think it's brilliant. I think it's really nice. So I'm really enjoying reading the book. If you haven't read it, my gosh, and if anything that I'm saying connects with you in any way, or you've got a business and you're getting really frustrated with what's going on and you don't know how to make sense of it in your head, or like this book has been a bloody lifesaver for me mentally. And it's helping me look at things in different ways, and understanding that there are other choices as well. And I think that's a really important thing. I'm going to leave it there because I went long, but oh my gosh, I do really enjoy this book. Go get it, read it, and let me know what you think. I'll leave it there. See you guys.